Hi guys. Since I'm getting into the top 10 book reviews, I wanted to do a top 10 on kind of the world mythologies, cultural histories type books, mostly from Western culture, but things that essentially have massive influence on the world and modernity through their fables and mythology. And so, without further ado, Ovid's Metamorphosis, um, excellent early, I believe, Roman writing. Dantes Inferno, he also wrote Paradiso and Purgatorio. If you're going to read one of the three, I would read the Inferno because it's probably the most interesting. It deals with hell, and it's really the something that was written in the 1300s, and maybe even a little earlier than that. I don't know the exact date off the top of my head. It's been a while, but it really goes into the basically this influenced our modern idea of hell. The idea that hell is a place within the earth with burning fire and the devil's in the bottom of it, and people are being tortured by demons there. All of that stuff, a lot of it comes from Dante's Inferno. Recommend reading all three, but if you're going to read one, start with the Inferno. Um, The Voyage of Argo by Apollonius of Rhodes. Virgil's Aeneid. Don Quixote by Miguel Cervantes. This might not be as funny or as interesting to modern readers. I found it very interesting, but it's where a lot of the classic novel humor comes from in Western society. Hesiod's Theogony. This is a very small book. It's like 70 some pages. What you'll find reading this is what introduces us to all the Greek mythological characters. So anytime you're hearing about all these Greek mythologies, this is kind of where they come into play. He did not come up with them. He simply is probably one of the first people to put, I don't know what you'd call back then. I was going to say pen to paper, and then I thought, no, it's older than that. Maybe ink to papyrus, but it's older than that, and maybe carving to clay or something. I'm not sure, but definitely a very early work, and it establishes a lot of the Greek mythology that comes from that time on. Following that, we'll go right to the Iliad and Odyssey by Homer. Again, some of the earliest Greek epic poems that kind of inspired the era of epic poetry, with a lot of characters based on the mythology of the characters in Hesiod's Theogony. Aesop's Fables. What you'll be interested in, this is a 6th century BC writing, is how old some of these stories are, and how you will know some of these stories even though these are thousands of years old at this point, and maybe even oral tradition much earlier than that. And what's interesting is you have Aesop's Fables, which are a collection of short fables in Greece. A lot of those made it to Rome, which then made it to lands that Rome spread out to, like Germany, which at a certain point was kind of the head of the Roman Empire, so to speak, or at least that part of the Roman Empire. And there were two brothers that went around thousands of years after this was written, and they started collecting in the early 1800s, late 1700s, all the myths and folk tales of the Germanic peoples that lived out in the countryside, that had oral traditions that went back hundreds or thousands of years. And they came up with something called Grimm's fairy tales, and they are the Brothers Grimm, who are a real set of Germanic brothers, and they collected all these, and you'll notice some of the stories overlap with those of Aesop's fables. What you also know is this is the earliest version of the Disney stories. So many of the stories, like the Princess and the Frog and Cinderella and what other Disney stories are in here? There are a bunch of, almost all the Disney stories that you could think of are going to come from this, which is interesting. You have, let's see here. Gosh, I thought there was oh yeah, there is a list here. Grimm's Fairy Tales. So which Disney ones might be found in here? The Frog and the Prince. Hansel and Gretel. Rapunzel. Cinderella. Little Red Riding Hood. Clever Alice. The Six Swans, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Rumpelstiltskin, The Golden Goose, The Wolf and the Fox, Clever Gretel, The Fox and the Geese, anyways, you get the point. Tons, almost all of the Disney fairy tales come from here. They're old. A lot of those came out in the 30s, 40s, 50s. And subsequently, we have newer versions of those now. But what a lot of people don't know is a lot of these things like, gosh, I'm not a huge Disney fan. The one with the witch who wants to look beautiful or whatever, and it's not Cinderella, it's one's mirror on the wall or whatever, right? So that is something that is in the Grimm's fairy tales, and it's actually traced back almost 2,000 years earlier than that into early Rome, and it comes from an early Roman story, which is believed to be traced back to an early Greek story, which is also thought to be traced back to an Egyptian story. And so some of these stories, when you're watching Disney fairy tales, might actually be thousands of years old. Beowulf, because it is, if you come from European descent, it is a oral traditional story that probably embodies a lot of the early mythology and thoughts of people of European descent. And the Epic of Gilgamesh has a lot of similarities with the Old Testament, very Old Testament, or beginning of the Old Testament. There is also a man in here called Upnapishtu, who sounds a lot like Noah. The name doesn't sound the same, but Upnapishtu and Noah are both the sole survivors of a flood that was sent by the gods to wipe out mankind for essentially their vaingloriousness, and they both build boats which they survive the flood in with their families and are tasked with rebuilding society after. And so it's like, well, there's a lot of similarities here. But again, it's one of the oldest pieces of writing. I think the earliest stone tablet version of this is 28 or 2700 BC. So that's almost 5,000 years old at this point. And that's the earliest tablet form. We're talking oral tradition. Gosh, who only knows how old this is. So this is absolutely an early work. I did not include the Bible in this, even though it is, of course, a massively influential theological work. But that is because I included it in my All Men Must Read This section. So stay tuned for more videos.